that good?
Yeah, I would do a little bit more, but yeah, you're doing a really good job. What do you think? Do you think it looks? Think it's ready to be blended?
Yeah.
You think so? Okay. So before we blend it, we have to do oil. So we need to put some oil in here. And I have 1/4 cup. And sometimes it can be more than 1/4, but I just kind of like to start with 1/4 because I'd rather have less oil to start than more. So I'm going to have you pour that in the 1/4 cup. Awesome job doing it over so it doesn't spill. That's probably a good idea. Nice thinking. Okay. Great. So now that we have that to start with, we're just going to blend it. I just kind of start with one, so I'm going to blend it a little bit and then have you give it a try.
Okay.
So you kind of saw how I did it. It's really simple. Just kind of move it around, and since they're bouncing out, you might want to press down as you mix it. So I have you do that for a little bit, and just that one, but if you think that you need to go up to 2, that's fine. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and stop you there, and it looks pretty good. What do you think of it? Think we can mix it some more?
Let me try matching it with the spoon a little bit more.
Sure, you might want to do that for a little bit more. And while you're doing that, I am going to get our seasonings ready. Yeah, that looks great. Good combination of mashing and blending.
Mash and blend, mash and blend.
Alright, now what's
Any more?
well, what do you think?
It's pretty mushy.
It's pretty good?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to say, get a little off the spoon and taste it and see what we think, see if we're done. Try it. Tastes good?
Mm-hmm.
Think it's ready?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so there is your basic hummus. So thank you for helping me.
You're welcome.
Today we are going to make a hummus recipe, and you are actually going to be deciding the procedure of how you want to go about making it.
Okay.
Because you remember last time we made hummus, do you remember what we did during that?
Yeah, you kind of started each step and then let me finish them.
Yeah, so I was modeling it for you.
Right.
So now we're basically going to have you do the recipe yourself. And throughout the recipe, I'm just going to be asking you some questions about how your process is going, what you think is working and what's not working.
Cool.
So because I know you know how to kind of loosely put together a hummus recipe, I wanted to just ask you about some other things that you've cooked to kind of figure out where you are on cooking expertise.
Okay.
So what's something that you have cooked that is super easy, you could just do it in your sleep?
Pancakes.
Pancakes.
Every time, yeah.
Okay. And then what is something that you tried to cook that was maybe a little difficult, didn't turn out well, or you're just not even going to start?
Pretty much anything that has to do with baking.
Okay.
Baking a cake or cookies. I'm very good at that.
Okay, so hummus is kind of not as hard as baking and probably not as easy for pancakes because you haven't done it as much.
Right.
So it's right in the middle. Perfect. Based on the fact that you're going to be making your own procedure, I just wanted to see if there is something that you do all the time or that you do quite often in steps that could maybe help you apply a step-by-step procedure to this.
Basically, whenever I'm working, I have to set up a game plan of what we're going to do for the day with the kids that we're working with, starting with what the activity is, then the equipment that we're going to need, where we're going to have to do the activity at, based on how much room we're going to need.
Okay, so if you were gonna kind of take that type of step-by-step situation that you're really familiar with and apply it to making hummus, could you just kind of walk me through the steps that you were thinking about doing?
I'd probably start with the biggest part of it, which would be mashing the garbanzo beans. And so once I mash them into somewhat of a paste, then add the smaller ingredients like the garlic or the shallots. And at the end of that, the last step would be to add seasonings like salt and pepper. So kind of start with the biggest ones and then move your way down.
Okay, awesome. Well, are you ready to get started? Do you have any questions?
Nope.
Nope. All right, let's do it. So
Okay.
your first step?
First step would be to pour about half of this can of garbanzo beans into this bowl.
Okay.
And then begin mashing them up with this fork.
So just a quick question, because I remember last time we used a blender.
Mm-hmm.
This time you're choosing to use a fork. Is there any reasoning behind that?
I just kind of feel like doing this by hand is going to be a little bit more effective. While it might take a little bit more time, you know, the blender just kind of knocked around the beans and didn't really blend them very well, and it didn't exactly crush them up. So I felt like this might be a little harder, but will be more effective at the same time.
All right, awesome.
Yeah, well, this is a lot. Takes a little bit more force than a blender does, I suppose. A little bit more time too.
Yeah. Well, one thing that you could do, which you already did do, is add oil. So sometimes if you add more oil, it makes them a little more slick, and then the beans don't get as dry.
Okay. Should I add more?
Well, it's up to you. What do you think the beans are looking a little dry?
I think I should put a little more in there.
Okay. All right. So one step down. The biggest step? What's your next step?
Would be to cut up the shallot into small pieces and then add it.
All right. So we had 3 ingredients here, and I wanted you to choose 2. So you have, what do you have here? Shallots?
I have a shallot, some garlic, and some horseradish sauce.
Okay.
And I just decided to use the shallots and the garlic.
Okay.
Okay. Finely chopped shallots, and I'm going to add them now. Okay. The last of that.
So sometimes when you're trying to pick something up like that, especially when it's diced really small, using your hand works, but when it gets down to the last bits, you can take the knife and actually slide them onto the knife and then dump it in.
Okay. So now I'm just mixing it into here.
Okay.
And now I'm going to add some garlic to it.
Okay.
So I gotta peel this thing. Whoop! Got it. Okay. I'll do it this way.
So that way works really well. There's also another way that you can do it, is you can see how all the pieces are kind of stuck to the ends of the garlic. If you chop a tiny bit off of each end and then do the rolling thing that you just did, it'll just come off completely.
I was wondering why the rolling thing wasn't working. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to dice this up in very small pieces. Okay. I got that diced up super small. Try that knife thing you're talking about.
Yeah. How do you think that works?
Yeah, it's easier than taking it all up, that's for sure. Okay. So now I'm gonna mix that garlic in with the shallots and the beans.
Okay, and then that would be your second step.
Mm-hmm.
So how are you feeling about the procedure so far?
I think it's working. I
Okay.
think it's good to do step by step, big to small.
Mm-hmm.
So the last step would be to add the smallest ingredients, which would be all the seasonings.
All right, and you are using?
Salt and pepper, and I'll probably add a little bit more oil.
Okay.
So I'll do that right now. Okay, so there's the oil.
Looks good.
Now I'm going to add some pepper to it. And some salt. And there it is. Finished product.
All right. Oh, it looks really good and it smells good. So how do you think that this procedure was an improvement from the first time that we made hummus?
I think that doing the mashing by hand was a lot more effective than the blender.
Okay.
It's just a little more like work, but it's more effective.
Mm-hmm.
I think keeping it a little more simple with the seasonings was just made it go a lot more smoothly.
Yeah, that's very true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with you. I do think that these look a lot more mashed than when we use the blender. So I think that's a really good idea.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to make hummus again, say just any kind of hummus recipe, doesn't have to be the same one, what part of your procedure would you keep?
Probably, doing this by hand with a big fork,
Mm-hmm.
dicing the things up very small, and taking the steps that I took when doing the beans first, then the smaller ingredients, then the spices after that.
Okay. Is there anything that you would want to change?
Yeah, actually, I'd rather have more than one bowl to mash the beans up into, so I could, add half the can,
Mm-hmm.
mash them up, pour the other half in the can in a different one, mash them up, and then add them together. That way, it would just be easier to get a better mash, I feel like.
Okay, so you think then it would be better than having
Just-
some more mash than others?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it'd be easier.
Yeah, I think that would be kind of a cool thing to try out, having more bowls.
Mm-hmm.
So overall, how do you feel about your procedure?
I think it was good. It was effective, and that's just the way I usually do things. So it's effective for me.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you.
In my original lesson, I was overly focused on my role and my agenda as the teacher. I had the steps I wanted to take planned out in my head beforehand, and that kind of resulted in me not really responding to what the learner was doing throughout the actual lesson. In my redesign lesson, I worked on centering the lesson and the goals on the learner by allowing him to create his own procedure, and by my asking open-ended questions about what it is that he was doing, why he was doing it, why he thought that would be effective or not effective. Also, these open-ended questions served as a way for the learner to reflect on what he was doing, and I think that was really effective. In my redesign lesson, I think that the theories that I chose to use were very effective for this particular lesson. The transfer from information processing theory, I think, was definitely a really good choice, because having the learner just make a hummus recipe all on their own would be kind of difficult without having them access some kind of procedure that they use in other areas of their life. So that actually turned out to be really useful for the learner, and I think it helped in their going through the process. The other theory that I used was cognitive development. Because we had made hummus before, I wanted the learner to be able to kind of take on the recipe by doing everything themselves hands-on. So having the procedure that they chose through transfer was helpful in having them be able to execute that procedure. Because I had the learner do this largely on their own, the actual step-by-step making of the hummus, I think using scaffolding from sociocultural theory was definitely really important, because there were some parts in the video where I saw that the learner had some difficulty in doing some things. So I was able to walk them through that. Also, in the beginning of the video, I chose to use sociocultural theory by figuring out the learner's zone of proximal development. And that was actually really useful because I needed to figure out where they were in their cooking experience to figure out how I was going to add my scaffolding techniques. And it actually ended up being pretty useful when I was able to see what they were having trouble with in the process, and then I was then able to scaffold to help them with that. All in all, I think the three theories and the strategies that I use complemented each other very well, and definitely worked with the lesson of having the learner take it on themselves and me being a sideline player. If I were to do this lesson again, I would actually incorporate the modeling strategies that I used in my original lesson. There are several times in my redesign lesson where I scaffold by kind of showing the learner what I could do, but I do this verbally and hand motions. I think that if I took the modeling by showing him the step while I actually do it and then having him do it, if I paired that modeling from the original lesson with my scaffolding in the redesign, I think that would probably make my teaching more effective and probably help the learner in their understanding of what I was trying to get across.